my name is Anne Haggat and I'd like to welcome you to this event, which is being jointly supported by the National Widening Access and Participation Management Group and the Schools for Higher Education programme, or SHEP. For those that are unfamiliar with these organisations, the National Widening Access Managers Group is a collective of the higher education institution widening access managers working on issues around widening access. And SHEP is an impartial SFC funded programme working with school pupils from S3 to S6 to inspire them towards higher education and provide information, advice and guidance. Together we're delivering a series of 4 live events designed to support teachers and advisors in their support of applicants towards higher education. Today's event is going to focus on contextual admissions and supporting references. And we have with us Chris, who is a development worker with Aspire North, and Jack, who's a development worker with Liftoff, who will explore both contextual admissions and the writing of a supporting reference for higher education application. Throughout the presentations, you can ask questions using the question and answer function, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of this presentation. We'll also have a transcript of the questions available on the website that you can see in the Q&A panel at the side, at the moment available following the event, and also a recording of this event. So without further ado, I think I'll pass on to Chris to take us through contextual admissions and how important those are.
Brilliant. Hello everyone, thanks very much for coming. I very much appreciate you taking the time. I am going to cover the basics of contextual admissions, how it affects us as advisors, how we can use it in applications, and then hand over to Jack to go through the nitty-gritties of the referencing. So I'm just going to share my screen. And that's fine. And hopefully you can see that. I'm sure my colleagues will let me know otherwise if that's not working out. So yeah, as I said, that's what I'll be covering for the next 19 minutes or so. The first thing I'll be chatting about is taking you through an activity we actually run with our pupils. As Anne mentioned with the Schools for Higher Education programme, I work primarily with S3s to S6s. And this is an activity we actually run with our S6s in a UCAS and a college application workshop. And we asked them to consider Andrew, Sarah, Ben and Katie to think a little bit about what an admissions officer should choose between those candidates for a degree they're going for. So they're asked to look at these qualifications here and what they should hopefully arrive at, and hopefully some of the more eagle-eyed amongst you will have seen already. They all have the same grades. And the whole point of this is to show that even though these candidates might have certain contextual factors, perhaps Andrew had certain things holding him back, perhaps Katie came from a relatively well-off background, had tutors and had certain advantages, the admissions officer doesn't know that. So we need context in the form of contextual admissions, personal statement, and the references that we provide as advisors to support with that. So it's very important. The advantages are many to the applicant. They get to give a full account of their background. They get to give an account of their potential, of their chosen course. They get the maximum benefits the university offers pre and post application. So it's very, very useful. As advisors, you ensure a core part of your capacity is achieved as an advisor. You get to maximize the benefits to the applicant and you get them the support they need going forward. And finally, institutions, it's a win-win situation. They get a full understanding of the applicant and they can take that into account as well throughout their time with the institution. So how do we actually define contextual admissions? Well, essentially, it's the process that higher education institutions take into account when they're thinking about an applicant's performance. So things beyond their grades that could have affected them in the first place. This isn't just part of widening participation programs or part of what higher education institutions are doing. It goes all the way to the top. The Scottish Government has a target for all pupils, all students within higher education institutions by 2030 to come from underrepresented backgrounds as 20% of their student population. Institutions themselves recognize a greater need for diversity themselves, and they also have funding and outcome agreements with the Scottish Government to get to that point in their student population. So that's the wider context of contextual admissions. But how do we actually quantify that in the first place? What makes you a contextual admissions applicant in the first place? Well, there's three main ones. There's area level indicators, individual level, and widening participation programs. And it's important to be aware of them because, as I say, as advisors, we need to be able to maximize the opportunities for your applicant and be aware of any pitfalls as well, because there's only so many places you can indicate certain indicators in an application. So in order to maximize the benefits, it's great to be aware. The first one is the area level indicator. This is represented by something called the Scottish Index for Multiple Deprivation, otherwise known as SIMD. And they look for applicants who are within the 20% most underrepresented areas or 40% most underrepresented. And essentially, it's a geographical marker based on your postcode, which I'll show you in a second, as long as the internet allows me. Works until you need it to. Represented by what you can find on this map here. And essentially, it's a geographical marker, as I say, represented in your postcode that indicates things like, in terms of where you live, like income, employment, health rates, crime rates, and they are represented in terms of color by the darkest red being the most deprived areas that people live in, and dark blue being least deprived. And you can see here, just on a broad map of the country, where those least deprived people are, and the most deprived as well. You can use this yourself. This isn't some secret website or some knowledge. This is something you can type in and you can have a look at. Either you can click here on most deprived 20% just to take a look. You can see Glasgow has it's more than its fair share. Or what you can do is you can type in your applicant's postcode and you can go to exactly where they live and see where they fall within that range. It's not a perfect measure. It's great in cities, but for example, if I just look at the most deprived 20%, you'd think that there was not a single deprived candidate within the entire northeast beyond the cities, Fraserburgh and Peterhead, and that's just not the case whatsoever. It's not great for rural areas, but it is the most consistent factor used by institutions, and it is just one among many factors that are considered. The other factors are the individual level indicators, as I mentioned. The second most used contextual marker here is whether you've been in care or not, but there's other ones as well, whether you've been a carer, you're first in your family to go to university, you're in receipt of free school meals, significant adverse circumstances, what school you attend, all kinds of individual level indicators to be aware of. They're particularly important because there's not, for example, a free school meals button to tick in your UCAS application, and not that I'm aware in most college applications either. So it's great to be aware of those so that you know the applicant that you're working with mentions that, or you mention it in your reference, for example. And then finally, widening participation programs. So depending if many of you perhaps are from schools, some of you might come from schools with lower progression to higher education institutions. So you might work with the Schools for Higher Education program, like Focus West, which works in the southwest of Scotland. You might attend SWAP if you're a mature student, REACH if you're looking at medicine, dentistry, veterinary law, etc., or the Sutton Trust as well, like different types of summer schools. And those are just a few, just to name a few. So those are the basics of what the markers are used, but how do institutions actually use them? We tend to, when we think contextual admissions, it's quite easy to sort of sum that up as minimum entry requirements. They get their grades lowered for them. Well, actually, there's a whole world of opportunity out there, which I'll highlight, but there's also some pitfalls with that and some subtleties to be aware of. So it's important to be aware of those. So first of all, in terms of what kind of support, what can you get? Well, you can get application support. So for example, again, when the internet allows me, University of the West of Scotland offers opportunities for their care experienced or carer or estranged students to get one-to-one tailored support, assistance with UCAS or SAS applications, advice about funding, for example, along with a whole host of other things. So that's an example of some of the support that institutions can offer in that area. Of course, there's one of the more famous ones, which is lower entry requirements. Be nice, IT, thank you. You can get this in most UCAS courses if your applicant's applying to university, for example, but also on the web page itself, you can take a look. So for example, here with Edinburgh, with an accounting business, you can usually scroll down to most courses, click on entry requirements, and just below the standard here, it will give you the minimum of what they're looking at. So Edinburgh looks for a whole load of A's for that course to achieve by the end of S5. But the minimum entry requirements, if you meet their contextual admissions requirements, is just a single A, a few B's, and all by the end of S6. So you can see here, oh, what have I done? The type of advantages you can get. Accommodation discounts, for example, Aberdeen University this year offered all of its SIND 20 students an opportunity to get their accommodation free for a year. Obviously, if you watch the news, maybe student accommodation isn't always the best idea at the moment, but that's totally besides the point at the moment. It's just that's what's on offer. Bursary offers, for example, if you're an Access student with, for example, Robert Gordon University, they offer lots of different Access scholarships and bursaries. There's a whole page full of them, which you can scroll down here. Just for example, just picking the first one, you can get a £1,500 scholarship if you attend one of these courses at Grey School of Art at RGU, and if you meet certain requirements, so if you're SIND 20 or 40, falling within that range, or if you're looked after child, or if you've done their Access 2 program, which is an RGU program, kind of like a summer school, except it's done in term, essentially. So that's one of the opportunities. School offers, like I mentioned, eligibility for transition events as well. So, for example, if you attend the SWAT program at Heriot-Watt University, and planning on going to Heriot-Watt, then they offer transition events that can give you lots of information and support going forward. So that's just some great examples. And then finally, ongoing support, which is one of the underrated ones. If you think as advisors, one of our most important roles, of course, is working maybe for a few weeks, months with that applicant to get their application right, even though you might have known them for a while now. They will be in higher education for 1 year to 5 years, perhaps. And so that ongoing support is one of the most important things. So that's why it's important to be aware of all those kinds of things that institutions offer. So you'll see there's a whole world of opportunity out there. However, there's also pitfalls and subtleties to be aware of. So I'm just going to take you through some examples. I'm just going to compare to institutions. If you think I'm taking you on a bit of a whirlwind tour, by the way, of all the different websites, don't worry. We have a resource prepared just for you on our website, which we'll highlight after the event. And that has all the different pages that I've highlighted and how you can get in contact with institutions if you'd like to find out more yourself going forward. But just to highlight, for example, contextual admissions at Dundee University. If you look at them here, what they offer are categorizations, which I'll explain in a moment, but they make access level offers, prioritization for an interview, and also invitations to their summer schools as well. So that's what they offer, for example, and they do it on a categorization basis. So they look for category 1 factors. So that's if you meet any of these factors, they will offer you those kinds of advantages. So if you fall within what's called their SIND quintile 1 zone, it's just another term for SIND 20, essentially. If you receive free school meals, if you're looked after a person, for example, all of these things will support your application. On the other hand, though, if you meet just category 2 factors, then it's important to be aware of the subtleties. And this is where, again, speaking from my perspective, working from S3s to S6s, sometimes students can get caught out because they tend to assume, oh, well, I'm such and such this, such and such that, therefore I'll definitely get the minimum entry requirement offer. However, that might not be the case. So, for example, it says here, other factors that might have impacted your study may, at their discretion, allow for Dundee to offer you certain support. So only may at discretion, and if you only meet more than one. So, for example, SIND quintile 2, which means they're 21 to 40%. So it's not SIND, it's only SIND 20 that gets you the automatic. If you go to SWAP program, for example, or any other programs, again, there's some subtlety here that needs to be aware of. So just if one candidate or one of your applicants just happens to meet one of these factors and doesn't meet any of these factors, it might mean that they're not entitled to the same kind of support they might be expecting. The best way to find out is if your school is with Schools for Higher Education program or SWAP programs or anything else like that, then you can get in contact with them, or you can just contact them direct. And part of the resource that I've created for you has that contact details as well. Hear from the horse's mouth what they have to say, and they'll also give you that information as well. So that's one example. But if we compare that to Strathclyde, these two aren't diametrically opposed, by the way, they're just offer some good examples. They tend to focus on 3 different ones. First of all, they will offer minimum entry requirements for anyone that's in SIMD 20 or 40. So automatically we have a bit of a difference here because they include the 40%. They also look at attendance at a school with low progression to higher education. This is definitely one of the more generous contextual admissions factors. So if you attend a school that's on their list, then you may be eligible for those minimum entry requirements. And then time spent in care. So you can see here that there's some subtleties in the way that institutions offer support with contextual admissions. So it's important to be aware of that for your applicant, because they could come into their application with certain expectations of what kind of support they might offer, and they might be totally unaware of all the other kind of benefits that I mentioned, especially, again, from my perspective, working with S3 to S6, many tend to focus on the lower entry requirements if they talk about it. Very few think about bursaries, summer schools, etc., etc. So it's important to appreciate that. So we've talked about the general definition of contextual admissions. We've talked about how institutions use them and why we should be aware of them. But what can we actually do as advisors? So, for example, if it's your applicant's doing a UCAS application and they have to be a student, for example, there's a section on activities for higher preparation for higher education. Make sure that your applicants, if it's relevant to them, have filled it out in the first place. It gives admissions officers an idea of the kind of preparation your applicant might have had going in. And you can see here there's a whole range of different ones, including, for example, here in the screenshot, Aspire North events. Have they attended open days, summer schools, things like that? There's all opportunities in there, and you can name more than one as well. Another thing you can look at is whether your applicant has been in care, and you can tick that as well. Just to make your applicant aware as well, a lot of institutions will follow up on that independently, just to verify and get further details from your applicant. So just so you're aware and can make your applicant aware to expect that as well. Obviously, college applications are slightly different. They're not necessarily universally the same, like UCAS to an extent. So, but in many, for example, the North East Scotland College applications, there's opportunities to click whether you've been in care, for example, or you're a young carer, for example, as well. But this is where it comes to us in terms of what we can really do to support, because of course we can make sure our applicant helps with that. We can help our applicant with that in their application. But of course, the reference is the strongest point. They only have so much room in their personal statement. Of course, it is an opportunity there for them to talk, give a bit more context. And if they do mention it in their personal statement, great. That means you can focus on reinforcing those contextual admissions information that they're giving. But it's also a great place to fill in gaps as well, because of course they've only got so much space in a personal statement, and your applicant will want to spend a lot of time talking about all the really positive things they've done in preparation, whether that's academic skills or interviewed someone in their career, etc., etc. So the best part about the reference is highlighting not just like what's already been talked about in an application, but what's not been talked about, such as free school meals. There is no free school meals button in UCAS at the moment, for example. Any personalised factors like estrangement, if there's been issues, if you're a teacher, if there's been staffing shortages or any issues at your school. And Jack, I know, has some examples of that as well. So you'll be able to follow up with that. With Jack when he talks in a bit more detail towards the reference. So that's one of the most important tools that we've got available. The final thing I'd like to talk about are competitive applications. There's probably a need for a better word for that, because of course all applications are competitive, I suppose. But what I mean by this are applications that have particularly pronounced lack of spaces compared to the number of those applying for it. We tend to think immediately law and medicine, but many of the allied health professions, pharmacology, physiotherapy, also other courses like conservatoire courses, it's not an exact science, but a general rule of thumb is any sort of course that requires an interview, for example, they tend to be the ones that admissions officers are looking for very specific information from us as advisors. It's nice to know that your school's had some problems with staffing if you're a teacher. It's nice to know this and that in terms of the context, but they're really looking for very specific things that I just wanted to highlight to you. So by way of example, what I mean by that, if we go onto the University of Aberdeen's non-academic requirements page for medical students, again, none of this is secret. They tell most of the websites will tell you exactly what they're looking for from your candidate. They've given a very useful document here on what they're actually looking for from their candidates. So here is a great opportunity for you as an advisor to make sure your applicants talked about, but also you can talk about whether they're empathetic, can care for others, can they deal with uncertainty, can they manage risk, are they organized? These are all very specific things admissions officers are keen to tick off so that they can invite your applicant to interview. So please make sure you're including that. That finishes up everything, and I'm I'm a minute early. Excellent. I must have blabbed too quickly. I hope you found that useful. I'll be hanging around at the end, and all those resources and the pages and things like that are available on the website. So I hope you found that useful and informative, and I'll hand over to my colleagues now. Thank you very much. I'll just unshare.
Okay, Chris, thanks, amazing, that was great. Hi, I'm Jack, I'm development worker here at Liftoff. I'm going to share tips on how to write a reference using all the information that Chris has just shared. So, by the powers of technology, I'm going to share my PowerPoint, and hopefully you can see that. So, the reference. So the focus here is to look at how to write a reference using all that contextual information that we've just found out. Regardless of your role, and this will help you find relevant areas specific for you. You might be an advisor, you may have been approached to write a reference, or you might be working in a sort of secondary school helping to write a reference for a UCAS application. So the aim here is how to write the reference to include the contextual information with a focus on the higher education application, and how to provide concrete examples of the applicant's work using subject-specific language. And also, I want to quickly look at how we can streamline the reference writing process. So this is going to be the structure of my quick presentation. We're going to look at the requirements of a reference as a whole, and we're going to sort of split it into two sections, the school information and then the applicant information. Now, it's really important to know that school information should only be a small amount, around 20% of the characters that you're allowed to use. Now, UCAS, lovely people that they are, I've limited your reference to only 4,000 characters. We've got to make sure that the focus is really on the applicant. So we'll explain the applicant information, and we'll split that into the three sections that you can see below it. And depending on your responsibility as a referee, each of those subsections will differ in importance for you. But at the bottom there, the aim is to form a complete picture of the applicant, regardless of the setting that you work in. So let me start by saying that there's no perfect format for a reference. However, by the end of this presentation, we'll all agree that concrete examples are invaluable, and hopefully you're all frantically nodding away in your office. If you're writing a reference for a higher education applicant, it's an informed, academic, and honest assessment of an applicant's suitability for further study. And UCAS, as I mentioned, has that lovely 4,000 character limit, and so it's really important to be specific and focus on the applicant. For a UCAS application, the vital ingredient is the sort of synergy between the personal statement and the reference. So especially for those sort of high demand courses that Chris mentioned earlier. So it's really important, if you are the referee, to have the personal statement in front of you, read through it, so you know exactly the applicant's strengths, skills, and the chosen course that they want to study at undergraduate level. So Chris has mentioned some of that contextualized admissions and the information needed in the UCAS application. Here on the screen is an example of an applicant's personal circumstances and how they coincided with examinations. So this was taken from a reference used by a school. It's important, therefore, to let the admissions staff know of any challenges out of the applicant's control. And we'll come and move on to some other examples later on. So, school information. If you are a referee for a secondary school applicant, then this will totally be relevant for you. Or if you are someone responsible for writing a reference, you can adapt this to your setting. Keep this brief. As I mentioned, you're looking for about 20% of the characters focused on the school. UCAS really recommends you use a link to your website where they can find out a lot more information about your school. Now, are your pupils involved in a widening participation program? This sort of contextual information, as Chris mentioned, is vital for them to sort of get that minimal entry requirements. We also need to identify, if they haven't done in their personal statement, the SIMD number, the 20%, 40%, as Chris mentioned, and also if they have access to free school meals. Any extra contextual information that they haven't mentioned in their personal statement is really valuable to put into the school reference. Highlighting things out of the applicant's control, as you mentioned, will really help form this complete picture of the applicant that we're aiming for. This could be staffing issues, as the example you can see down there is, or even specific like damage to a building. We support 2 secondary schools that unfortunately have had fires. And so the school included a quick wee paragraph at the start of their reference just to put in context what the students had been through that academic year. So as I said, UCAS really recommend to save on the characters and use the website link to add more information about the school. Let's focus on the applicant. So the picture is, we've started to paint this picture from the information that Chris has provided. Let's now add a little bit more detail. For higher education applicants, your reference should focus on the kind of 5 bullet points on the screen. The student's academic performance, their potential for academic performance in higher education, maybe college or university, why the course they've chosen is suited to them, any personal qualities which will benefit them at university, and what they can bring to the university. If you're an advisor or have been approached to write a reference, select the most relevant points on screen and relevant to the applicant. Let's look at the applicant information by considering their existing achievements, their motivation and willingness to sort of learn, their relevant skills and qualities, and any relevant work experience or volunteering. If they're a mature student, that work experience and the skills that they've gained will be really valuable to add to the reference. Let's break it down then. Let's look at the academic ability. Remember, 20% maximum to the school information, therefore we've got at least 80% that we can dedicate just to the applicant. Head of undergraduate admissions staff all across the country, all across the UK, they all agree that concrete, detailed examples of how the applicant has performed are essential. That was the thing that we nodded at the start. These are really essential to add to the reference. Subject-specific language with the detailed examples can bring a reference to life. See, the examples on the screen here were comments written by subject teachers that the referee simply copied and pasted into the reference because it's giving specific examples of how that student performed. Stephen's ability to draw comparisons and make contrasts between different political systems is particularly worth of praise. This was taken from the sort of social subjects teacher. If the referee doesn't know the applicant on a personal level or have taught them, it's vital therefore that you get a clear comment from the subject teachers who know the applicant, their strengths, their weaknesses, their area to develop. Think about the evidence of the applicant's performance through assessments. So as teachers, this could be formative or summative assessments. It could be your observations of how well they work with others in their class, how dedicated they are, their time management, as well as any summative benchmarks against the experiential outcomes. Any form of assessment that you can use to give a concrete example will really benefit the applicant. The goal here is to really accentuate the applicant's strength. And again, it's your honest opinion of their suitability for the course. There we go, Ben here. Could not recommend Ben to you highly enough as being one of the most suitable candidates for a place to train as a primary school teacher. So that's a really simple example that's been taken from a subject teacher comment and pasted into the final reference for the applicant. Personal qualities. Now this is one which will feature regardless of the setting or your referee responsibilities. If you're approached to write a reference, then you're going to include comments on the applicant's personal qualities and skills. There's a vast list of demands of student life, much more than the 5 on screen there. Therefore, demonstrating essential personal qualities in the reference is absolutely key. And again, we've got Stephen here, who's doing a phenomenal job apparently in his school. He's balanced and sensible individual, high levels of commitment, determined, enthusiastic. All these great buzzwords paint this great picture of Stephen as easily being able to thrive in a higher education setting. Again, we've got this direct quote that we'll come on to later. Really beneficial to have a direct quote or comment from the subject teacher or the applicant. If you are a teacher, think about, does the applicant demonstrate critical thinking skills? Do they demonstrate curiosity and the ability to question and debate? How motivated are they to drive their own learning? How enthusiastic are they? If they're falling asleep in class, maybe they won't thrive as much in higher education. And how well do they communicate with others, with yourself as a teacher? These are things that you can think about, their qualities and skills that they bring. Finally, and I am blabbing very fast, it's important to think about their extracurricular activities. Important to highlight their interests and achievements in any work experience that they've done. Then discuss the skills developed from these experiences. And finally, how these relate to their chosen course or destination. It's important that the reference is written by someone who knows the applicant. And like you said, if you don't have direct contact with the applicant, find someone who does. They'll provide really valuable information and comments that you can use in the final reference. Sharing any achievement emphasizes the applicant's qualities and demonstrates dedication and the ability to multitask, a really important skill when learning in higher education. The example on screen here is the applicant Ben, who has been part of the winning team at the World Championships and playing that very loud instrument you hear every time you arrive by train in Edinburgh. So well done, Ben, on your achievements. So before I quickly move on, talk about how we can get these comments from subject teachers into the reference. Let's quickly just have a look back and remind ourselves of what we've discussed so far. So we've looked at the applicant information and we've broken it down into 3 sections. Their academic ability. We've looked at their strengths in that particular subject. We're using specific language. We're providing assessment details and we're giving concrete examples. These are really valuable. We then discussed personal qualities. What skills they bring, what they develop through work experience or volunteering. What skills do they demonstrate successfully? Their attitude, their enthusiasm, their motivation. And of course, as Chris mentioned, any contextual information that they may have missed out in their personal statement, you can then back that up in your reference to complete this full picture of the applicant. And finally, we looked at sort of their achievements, their extracurricular skills. Even if it's not necessarily related to the course that they're planning to study at undergraduate level, it still shows a mindset, a focus that they need to thrive in higher education. So on the screen just now is a template that we use at Liftoff for all our schools that we support around Tayside and Fife. When I've been going into schools and looking at how schools collect subject teacher comments, I've seen pages and pages of paper stapled together per pupil, per subject teacher. The mountains of paper is ridiculous. And so what we've done here is tried to condense it so that you can have comments from 4 different subject teachers with maybe 3 specific concrete examples or even a detailed paragraph on their academic ability, their personal qualities, and your honest opinion for their suitability for higher education. Do you think they will cope? And so this has been really beneficial to just streamline the process. And so the student can have this piece of paper, they can collect 4 different subject teacher references, that have clear examples, subject-specific language that the referee can then use, edit, cut, copy, paste into the final applicant's reference. Now, this goes without saying, but if the applicant is applying for, say, chemistry at university, it's really important, therefore, that you get the chemistry teacher's reference. They have to appear on this template. Okay, their use of their subject-specific language and the applicant's understanding of terminology will really build a complete picture of this applicant. And here are some of just the bullet points that we provide the subject teachers if they are a bit confused as what to include. We mentioned about their academic ability and their strengths in that subject. We really talked about it, and I've repeated it and repeated it for a reason, the use of such subject-specific language. Okay, giving examples of their excellent work that they've produced in your class. The assessment, your assessment, especially now with COVID, your assessments are really important beyond predicted grades, but how do they cope in class? How do they work? What's their attitude to get to where they are in class? Have they overcome any obstacles? Is there any mitigating factors that has affected their performance? We had an example earlier on about some personal circumstances which coincided with examinations. Does the result actually truly reflect their ability? Their personal qualities as well. Again, adding any contextual information is really beneficial and will make the applicant's reference and the whole UCAS application strong. And finally, their suitability. Again, it's this honest, fair and relevant assessment of the applicant's potential to succeed. And do you feel that they are suited for their chosen career path? So here on the screen are the contact details for Chris and I. All of the resources have been uploaded to the website, and I believe the link is in the Q&A. I'll now hand over, and I think I've sped through that. I'll now hand over to Anne, I think, so hopefully we can go through some of the Q&A questions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris and Jack, for taking us through that. It was a really good overview of contextual admissions and writing of a personal statement, or a reference for a personal statement and application. We just had a couple of questions in. If there are any more, please pop them in the Q&A just now and we'll try and answer those for you. We have answered these, but I just wanted to expand a little bit on the one about the web page for contextual characteristics. So Hayley's mentioned there that there isn't an overview anywhere, unfortunately. All of the universities have very different kind of policies, as Chris demonstrated in his presentation, and therefore really it's down to the applicant or their supporters to make sure that the institution of choice that their contextual admissions policy is understood and whether or not you would get that contextual admission. What we have done for you is we've got a resource on the website that we've posted there that has all of the contact details of all the institutions in Scotland and their admissions departments and how you can contact them. So please use that resource as a one-stop shop for all of the institutions if you've got queries and questions on contextual admissions, or go directly to their website. And yes, we will be sharing this presentation on that website once we're finished. It has been recorded, so if you do have colleagues that you would like to share this with, please do. We'll be happy, obviously, to receive comments and questions from everybody and anybody that watches the recording as well. Is there any other questions anyone would like to ask? I don't see any there, so I think it just remains for me to say thank you very much for attending this event. I hope you found it interesting, and we will hopefully have a feedback mechanism that you'll be able to give us some feedback on this. We do have a further 3 presentations in the series coming up in the next 2 weeks. And further information of those is found on that website as well. Our next one is on finance and supporting applicants with finance, and that's running next Tuesday. So once again, just to say thanks very much for attending, and we look forward to hearing from you if you've got any queries.